Usually when you get a keyboard or keyboard lineup revision, there's more mild changes made than anything else, or at least that's the expectation. With Keychron products, this has been pretty well managed over time, with regular iterations and updates to their already remarkably inclusive product stack. But that changes with the new V Max line of boards, and today we'll be taking a closer look at the V1 Max 75%, both in its $94 pre-built trim as well as in a custom build to represent the $74 bare bones version, to see just how different this board is when compared to its predecessor. For full disclosure, the folks at mechanicalkeyboards.com did send over today's V1 Max for us to look at as a loaner board. No money changed hands, and this content has not been viewed by anyone prior to upload. Be sure to check out all the links in the video's description for everything seen in today's video, and once again, thank you to mechanicalkeyboards.com for sending the V1 Max over for us to look at today. Topically, a first quick glance would tell you this is the exact same board it's always been, with a rotary knob in the top right, a black block-on wedge design in injection-molded ABS plastic, and an exploded Aero, Nav, and FRO cluster. They've also got the same OSA keycaps and the same poorly tuned plate mount stabs that you'll need to clean up and redo yourself. But that's where the similarities end, as this board line has now shifted to gasket mounting, which completely changes the internals of the board. More subtly, it changes the depth requirements of the case. With the presence of a wireless battery and added bounce from a gasket mount assembly, things needed more room to breathe. This also means a taller front height to the board, but the overall design still leaves things reasonably comfy to type on when using something like Cherry Profile or shorter. The stock plate material has also changed, finally transitioning away from steel and providing a Polycarb plate, something of a current industry standard. This also provides a much different, and in my opinion anyway, more pleasant acoustic note than steel does, and in this case assists in providing the most assembly bounce that's reasonably possible. Another thoughtful inclusion is alignment tabs in the case that slot into the plate to make sure everything is perfectly aligned, something that can be an issue for some gasket mount keyboards. There's a change in the foam config, moving away from really cheap and stiff feeling plate foam and a silicone case insert to a really nice pour-on plate foam and some intensely squishy case foam that reminds me of the sort of memory foam you'd find on a mattress topper. They also added in a PTF sheet to give the stock Gateron Jupiter Bananas a bit of a snappier sound, though in my testing I found this addition to feel a bit lacking. This could, to be clear, be entirely a matter of personal preference, but I think if there's a PTF sheet, you really should be using PE foam with it. But if you're just using PE foam, you don't necessarily need the PTF sheet. Because the PCB layout is identical to the previous generation, I was able to add my own PE sheet from my personal Keychron V1 to test, and, well, it just sort of sounded great as foamy builds go. The gasket mounting brings a slightly different PCB with a separate Daughterboard that houses the connections for USB and mode switching. This was a huge pain point for me in the previous Gen V1, as the mode switch was so delicate I accidentally broke it during one of my first disassemblies of the board because of the awkward reassembly, butterfingers, and a general lack of a Daughterboard. The downside of this arrangement is there's an awkwardly small gasket tab near this region. However, since the assembly also has side tabs on both sides of the plate, this is of minimal consequence to the overall feel of the board, only really impacting the top left corner and not by anything noticeable. Also along the rear are two USB dongles, one for USB-C and one for USB-A. For some reason, I wasn't really able to get a clean signal with the Type-C dongle, presumably because I have to mount it at the front of my computer, but the Type A work just fine. If you find yourself needing to reposition the dongles to be closer to you, they do provide you with some adapters to do this, but the supplied cable is USB-C to USB-C, so the only dongle you'd be able to reposition with what's included is the Type A. Stock keycaps haven't changed from their past OSA offerings, so not much to discuss here. If you liked or disliked them before, then your experience shouldn't shift that much here. For our rebuild, we decided to go with NovelKeys Cherry Stone, a member of their first-gen dye-sub PBT keycaps that I also refer to as modern materials at home. Stock switches have changed up a bit to Gateron Jupiter switches, in this case the Banana Tactile. Gotta admit, this is the most disappointing stock switch I've used from Gateron in some time, but it's not a bad switch, with well-rounded D-shaped tactility felt throughout nearly the entire switch stroke, only leaving a small amount of linear post-travel. The main issue is the leaf ping the switches have at stock. While it's not extremely noticeable in practical use, it's noticeable enough to me that the board doesn't sound quite as good as it could, meaning if you're particularly sensitive to the sound of leaf ping, you'll just want to skip these entirely. Presumably, the Jupiter Reds won't have this issue. For rebuild testing, we dug into MK's own line of switches and installed MK Purple Slush Linears, which I hand-lubed with 205 Grade 0. Last, but certainly not least, like so many boards these days, the V1 Max is QMK and VIA compatible. Now, the ultimate test for this or really any keyboard is to see whether or not it's capable of performing decently without any foams installed, and that's exactly what we did for the rebuild using the MK Purple Slush Linears and NovelKeys Cherry Stone. In recent history on the channel, we've had a lot of boards that have required a minimum of case foam as a result of some structural and design limitations that are presented, but Keychron V1 Max does not have those limitations, so we were able to genuinely build this without any foam. I'm happy to report that, with the exception of it being maybe a little on the thin side, this is the most competent foamless Keychron board I've ever built. This could all change with a different selection of parts, and as expected, the spacebar is, subjectively speaking anyway, the weakest region of the board, even with the nearby spacebar gasket removed. But this is a good sign that Keychron's case design has moved in the right direction, as I personally didn't feel the previous Gen 1 was buildable without foams of some kind to make it sound decent. Remember, foam will make any board sound good, but a good case will make a foamy board sound even better. The construction quality of the case and surrounding components make for a really nice overall assembly that actually lets you tune the sound, and to a lesser degree the feel, of the board based on your personal preferences. As for accessories I'd like to see added for this board, different plates are a must. Specifically, I think I'd really like to see this with a polypropylene option, palm, FR4, and absolutely aluminum. There's potentially an argument for carbon fiber, though personally speaking, I don't feel like carbon fiber would do this particular construction all that many favors, since with the wrong build, as we've experienced here on the channel, carbon fiber can make things sound kind of overly thin and shrill. Another interesting option would be a brass or copper plate for this board. While the cost of those plates is maybe not in line with the overall spirit and target price point and audience for this board, it is an interesting way to add density to a case that otherwise lacks it without adding the foams back into the assembly. A standalone PE sheet should also be offered for this board, since the one I got was part of an aftermarket kit through Keyboard Customs designed for the previous gen board. It doesn't need any other foam options though. What it comes with is actually kind of perfect otherwise. I'd also really like to see them start to offer this board in different colors, even if it's just for a limited run version. Hell, I think I'd even like to see their take on a fully transparent case design, which seems to be coming back en vogue, and they'd absolutely move units colored like an old school N64 or iMac. Lastly, and let me cook with this one for a second. Stiffer gasket material. It's true, there's a lot of boards out these days that are shipping with 2+ mounting styles available to them, and that's kinda cool on paper. But V1 and the V line in general now, as long as you're sticking to the Max line of boards, does gasket mounting pretty well for its price point. And if you're gonna be saddled with just one mounting style, it certainly should be done really well. I really like what V1 Max has done here. But it's done in such a way that I also suspect if you had something like, say, silicone gasket strips available to you, you might actually be able to simulate with this build something that's more akin to an isolation top mount, which with a polycarb plate might actually sound extremely good even in this all ABS assembly. But let me know, sound off in the comments below, what would you have to say about something like different gasket materials being on offer here? The Keychron V1 Max is a fundamental shift forward for the V line of boards, offering up stronger performance with more modernized internals than its predecessor at the exact same launch price, and being more in line with its contemporaries as a result. It's certainly faced with stiff competition these days, and we've taken a look at some of those boards here recently. But despite this not having a fancy aluminum case, it's still a board worth considering if you were thinking about adding a Keychron board to your desk that won't wreck your wallet. As for those of you who already own a last gen V1, it goes like this. If you're happy with your current board and you aren't looking to add to a collection of boards, then the V1 Max isn't a board you should be running out to throw money at. Remember, it's still missing out on the same accessories as the more established brands like your current gen V1, so you only have the PC plate here, and there's plenty of mods you can do to your V1, including changing out the plate for one of Keychron's own options, or hitting up one of a number of websites making aftermarket palm plate and foam options. There's also the change in front height, which might throw off some users, though personally speaking, the front height of the V1 Max is still fine given the rest of the design, assuming you're using a shorter keycap profile, again, like Cherry. Thanks for watching, be sure to check out the video's description for links to all of our socials and the Discord, as well as everything seen in today's video. On your way out, be sure to toss us a like if you liked what you saw, and while you're at it, here's some other keyboard content for you to peruse. Take care of yourselves and one another, and as always, we'll see you in the next video.